The Oscar-winning actor shares that his first name has been mispronounced his whole career.
There are currently 4 players named Denzel in the NFL.
I know.
And before your...
There's a lot of Denzels now.
There weren't that many before your first Oscar.
Denzel Washington doesn't just act, he dominates the screen. But what does it actually take to stay at the very top for decades in an industry that forgets most names in a matter of years? There is a weight to his presence that feels almost unexplainable, as if every role he touches is shaped by something deeper than performance.
Denzel Washington and his ability to be both versatile and familiar has made him one of Hollywood's most sought-after stars.
Denzel Washington has spent decades at the very top of Hollywood, becoming a standard that few can match and even fewer can sustain. But greatness like that doesn't come free. It's built in silence, paid for in sacrifice, and carried through years of choices the world never sees. Because behind every legend is a cost, and behind every standing ovation, there is always a story we were never told. Denzel Inner Journey. There is a question that haunts every person who ever rises higher than they were born to rise. A question that doesn't appear in the interviews, doesn't show up in the highlight reels, doesn't get printed on the magazine covers. It's the question that arrives at 3 in the morning in hotel rooms in cities you can't remember the names of, when the phone has finally stopped ringing and the awards are gathering dust on a shelf somewhere across the world. What did this cost me? Not what I gain, not what I achieve, but what did I trade? Because greatness is never given, it is exchanged. The world hands you the trophy with one hand, and with the other, it quietly reaches into your life.
Denzel took his 2nd Academy Award for his performance in Training Day.
And takes something you didn't know you were offering. For Denzel Washington, the world only sees the gift, the presence, the voice that seems to come from somewhere deeper than the chest, the eyes that can carry an entire scene without a single word being spoken. We watch him on screen and we feel something we cannot name, something that feels like recognition, like he is showing us a part of ourselves we had forgotten was there. But talent is not what you see when you watch Denzel Washington. What you see is the residue of a life, the accumulated weight of every loss, every disappointment, every moment of doubt that he refused to let define him, every prayer whispered into the dark, every silence he chose instead of an excuse. The man on the screen is not performing, he is remembering. The world sees strength, but strength, real strength, is almost always a house built on top of pain. The calm in his voice was forged in chaos. The discipline in his work was forged in temptation. The depth in his eyes was forged in losses he has never spoken about publicly, and probably never will. So we have to ask ourselves a question we usually avoid. What do we lose while trying to become unforgettable? What parts of ourselves do we leave behind in the climb? What faces do we stop seeing? What versions of ourselves do we never get to meet because we were too busy becoming someone the world would remember? Denzel's story is the answer, and it begins long before the cameras ever found him. Broken family structure. Mount Vernon, New York. The 1960s. A small city pressed against the northern edge of the Bronx, where the noise of America's biggest dreams meets the quiet ache of its working-class realities. This is where the story starts, not on a stage, not on a screen, but in a modest house, in a neighborhood that did not promise anything to anyone. His father was a Pentecostal minister, a man of the Word, a man who worked 3 jobs at a time, who came home tired in a way that bones remember even when memory fades. He was a father who loved his children, but love in his world was not a thing you said. It was a thing you proved, through provision, through discipline, through showing up at jobs you hated so the people you loved could have a roof over their heads. He was a man of God on Sunday, and a man of exhaustion every other day of the week. And in between, there was distance, the kind of distance that grows in a house where everyone is busy surviving. His mother was different. Lennis, a beautician who ran a shop where women came not just for their hair, but for their lives, for the kind of conversation that holds a community together when nothing else will. She was warm, she was fierce, she was the gravity in that family. But even gravity gets tired, and there were nights when even she could not hold it all together. And then, when Denzel was 14 years old, the gravity broke. His parents divorced. The structure of his small world cracked down the middle, and a boy who was already learning to keep things inside learned an even harder lesson. He learned that the people you love can be in the same house and still be 1,000 miles apart. He learned that silence is not always peace. Sometimes silence is just the sound of a family that does not know how to say what it is feeling. He has spoken about this period only in fragments over the years, a sentence here, a pause there. The kind of recollection that tells you more in what it leaves out than in what it says. Because some wounds do not become stories. Some wounds become the way you stand, the way you look at people, the way you hold yourself when the room gets quiet. This is where the man we know was first shaped. Not in acting class, not in Hollywood, but in the silence of a 14-year-old boy learning that the world will not always explain itself to you. That sometimes the people who love you most will hurt you anyway. That you will have to figure out how to carry things you did not ask to carry. And he did. He carried it. He carried it into every role he would ever play. But the silence at home was only the beginning. Outside the walls of that house, the world was waiting with a different kind of test. A harder one, one that would not give him the luxury of carrying anything quietly. The edge of losing everything. Mount Vernon in the 1970s was not a forgiving place for a young black boy with no clear direction. The streets were not metaphors. They were real, and they were patient. They waited for boys like Denzel with the patience of something that knew it usually wins. His friends started disappearing, some to prison, some to drugs, some to graves before they were old enough to vote. He has talked about this quietly when the moment was right. Several of his closest childhood friends were eventually killed or imprisoned. Lives that started in the same neighborhood as his, with the same pressures, the same temptations, the same daily decisions about which corner to walk down and which one to avoid. Versions of a story that could have been his story. Reminders that the line between making it and not making it is sometimes nothing more than luck and the love of one person who refused to give up on you. For Denzel, that one person was his mother. She watched him drifting. She watched the friends he was choosing. She watched the trouble starting to form, the way storms form on the horizon before they ever touch the ground. And she made a decision that must have torn something inside her. She sent him away. To a private boarding school in upstate New York. Far from everything he knew, far from the friends he loved, far from the streets that were starting to claim him. Imagine being 14, 15 years old and being told you have to leave. That the place you call home is no longer safe for the person you might become. Imagine the silence in that car ride, the confusion, the anger that probably felt at the time like betrayal. Because that is what discipline often feels like when you are too young to understand it. It feels like abandonment. It feels like being given away. But she was not giving him away. She was giving him a chance. And slowly, away from the noise, in a place where he was one of the only black students, where everything was unfamiliar and uncomfortable, something started to change. Discipline began to replace chaos. Structure began to replace drift. He started to discover that the silence inside him, the silence he had been carrying since he was a child.
American males in the movie industry versus 20 years back when you started.
Was not a wound. It was a room he could walk into, a room he could build something in. He didn't know yet what he was building. He didn't know yet that the kid who had almost been swallowed by his own neighborhood would one day stand on the world's biggest stages. All he knew was that he was still here, still breathing, still becoming. And sometimes that is the only victory that matters, because survival by itself is not a destination. Survival is a doorway. And on the other side of that doorway, something was waiting for him that he could not yet name. Denzel's early journey. By the time he reached Fordham University, Denzel Washington was a young man without a map. He bounced between majors, pre-med, political science, journalism. He was searching for something, but he didn't know what. He was hungry, sometimes literally. There were stretches where money was thin, where the future felt like a door that hadn't been built yet. He was a young man with potential, but no purpose. And anyone who has ever been there knows that this is one of the loneliest places a soul can stand. To know you are meant for something and to have no idea what that something is. It was at a YMCA summer camp where the door finally appeared. He was working as a counselor. The camp was putting on a small talent show. Almost as a joke, almost as a way to fill an evening, Denzel got up and performed. Some skits, some bits, something casual, something he didn't think twice about, but someone in the audience did. A man came up to him afterward. The story has been told in different ways over the years, but the heart of it never changes. He looked at this tall, unsure young college student, and he said something that would split Denzel's life into a before and an after. He said, "You should be an actor." Just that. A handful of words from a stranger on an ordinary night in a camp that no one outside that summer would ever remember. But sometimes that is how purpose finds you. Not in a thunderclap, not in a vision, but in a sentence from someone who happened to be in the right room at the right time, looking at you the way you had not yet learned to look at yourself. Something inside Denzel cracked open, not all at once, but slowly. He went back to school different. He started taking acting classes. He started reading plays the way other people read scripture. He felt, for the first time in his life, the alignment of who he was with what he was doing. And anyone who has ever felt that alignment knows it is the closest thing to a miracle most of us will ever experience. He had spent his whole life being shaped by silence, by absence, by the things people did not say in his childhood home. And now, suddenly, he had found a craft built entirely out of saying what people don't say, out of making the unspoken visible, out of giving voice to the silences that other people carry. He had not just found a career, he had found the only language his soul had ever truly spoken, and from that moment forward, he would never stop speaking it. But finding your purpose is not the same as being rewarded for it. The world had heard him, now it would test him, and the test would last for years. Legacy over fame. Hollywood then and now does not hand out destinies. It tests them, it bends them, it tries to break them just to see what they are made of. Denzel arrived in Los Angeles in the late 1970s with talent, with discipline, and with almost nothing else. The early years were lean. He had graduated from Fordham, trained at the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, and walked into an industry that did not know what to do with him. The auditions were brutal. The roles available to a young black actor in that era were narrow, and most of them came with conditions. Play this stereotype, say these lines, be this version of a man so the audience can feel comfortable, take the check, take the exposure, take what you can get and be grateful for it. And here is where most people would have folded. Because hunger is loud, bills are loud, the fear of being forgotten before you were ever known, that fear is the loudest sound in any young artist's life. But Denzel had something most people don't have. He had a foundation built out of refusal. He famously turned down a role in a film called Heart Condition that he felt reduced his character to a stereotype, only to be convinced later when the script was rewritten with more dignity. He walked away from paychecks that other actors would have run toward because they would have asked him to be less than the man his mother raised, less than the dignity his father preached, less than the version of himself he had finally started to find. His breakthrough came quietly on a hospital drama called St. Elsewhere, where for 6 years he played Dr. Philip Chandler. Then came Cry Freedom in 1987, then Glory in 1989, and an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor that announced him to the world. And then Sidney Poitier, the giant, the man who had carried the weight of representation for an entire generation, pulled him aside. The first few films you make, Poitier told him, will determine how the industry sees you for the rest of your life. Choose carefully. Denzel listened. He chose Malcolm X. He chose Philadelphia. He chose the hurricane. And in 2002, with Training Day, he became only the second black man in history, after Poitier himself, to win the Academy Award for Best Actor. But here is the part of the story they don't put in the highlight reels. The part that happens after the lights go off, the part that happens in the airports and the hotel rooms and the family dinners that get rescheduled until they don't happen at all. Success did not solve the silence Denzel had carried since childhood. Success amplified it. He has been married to Pauletta since 1983. In an industry where marriages collapse like buildings in an earthquake, theirs has stood. But standing is not the same as being easy. And then there has been the loss. Whitney Houston, his Preacher's Wife co-star, gone in 2012. Chadwick Boseman, whom Denzel had personally paid to attend a summer acting program at Oxford years before either of them was famous, gone in 2020. Sidney Poitier himself, gone in 2022. One by one, the people who had walked alongside him started disappearing. And in 2024, when doctors discovered blockages in his own heart and placed stents inside him, the message arrived clearly. Even legends are mortal. What did I do with what I was given? That is the only question left. So we return, finally, to the only question that ever mattered. Not what greatness looks like when it is finished, but what it demands while it is being built. Because if a life can appear this complete on the surface, awards, legacy, reverence, then what remains hidden in the spaces between the milestones? The years no one documents. The sacrifices no one archives. The self that is quietly rewritten so the world can recognize the result. Denzel Washington has become something larger than a name, a symbol, a standard. But symbols are never formed without fracture, and standards are never set without cost. And perhaps the most unsettling thought of all is this. If greatness is always purchased in silence, who is still paying for it right now in places we will never see? And what stories are still unfinished, waiting for us to understand the true price when the credits finally stop rolling?